In terms of offers that have been issued, because we've also talked about 80% of those protected 2026, 2027 offers out. What's the feedback been so far? I've got a little bit of feedback from some developers on quality and errors, but yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts as well. So Rachel, if you've seen or heard about many.
Not many on the Gate 2 front, but I do know we've had some Gate 1 offers that have maybe had some uncertainty around them. So there is a clause in those Gate 1 offers that says why that project is getting a Gate 1 offer. And the default line around this is that it's essentially because the project requested to get a Gate 1 offer, which in some cases will be true, but in some cases isn't. So definitely worth checking that before you sign it to check that reasoning is correct.
Welcome to the Connectology podcast. I'm Hugh Taylor, CEO here at Rachael Eynon, and in these episodes, our grid connection specialists, the Connectologists, dive into the evolving grid connections landscape, often taking expert guests with them in order to discover, generate, and share insights that might just help you and maybe even industry as a whole to connect projects faster, at lower risk, and at lower cost.
Hello and welcome to a Connectology podcast. I'm Kyle Murchie, and today I'm joined by Nikki and Rachael. Hello.
Hello.
So today, I suppose we're going to try and cover quite a few topics, get everybody up to speed as much as possible, and also even just get ourselves up to speed and I suppose have that kind of wider conversation, which would be really good. So I was thinking the one we could maybe start off with would be Gate 2 offer progress. Rachel, what's the story? Where are we now?
Yeah, so latest update that we've had was from NESO was on their webinar. So I think that was maybe a couple of weeks ago now, to say that 40% of those protected offers, the 26-27 protections, are now out. So still a way to go on that. And
interestingly, I've actually got a slight update on that. We just heard this morning through one of the trade bodies that as of the end of last week, as of Thursday, Friday, it was now 80%.
Okay.
But 80% of what is very questionable.
Yeah, because I think that had to be clarified as to what that 40% was on the webinar. But that does kind of chime with the webinar update from SSEN as well, I think. So they have said they've got all their pre-2028 TOCOs with NESO. So hopefully that is just a case of, pulling those appendices together and getting the NESO stamp on it before they come out. So they have been kind of checked from a technical perspective in that sense.
And Nikki, any sign of DNO offers yet?
No. Kind of. So I've seen one. So I've seen a beggar in Scotland, and the DNO variation has come out for that. So one.
And was that a Gate 2?
It was, yeah. So it's a very progressed project. But yeah, that is very much all I've seen so far is the beggar and the kind of subsequent DNO variation, which. Well, really, there wasn't a lot to do on that. There was, a date to update, but that was it, really.
Yeah, because it'd be really interesting that 80%, which had been maybe 40% a couple of weeks ago, whether that includes those 2026, 2027 protected distribution offers. I suspect probably not. But just as a reminder from a timeline perspective, although most distribution offers will come later, anything that was 2026, 2027 protected distribution offers should be between early March and the end of May. So we're definitely halfway through that window now at the time of recording. But maybe it'll all happen in the next few weeks.
Hopefully, the DNOs have got an aim to get the offers out to customers, but it varies a little bit depending on DNO, but so that customers have got at least kind of 4 to 6 weeks to have a look at those and to get them reviewed and decide whether they're going to accept them or not.
And Nick, I know that in most DNOs, they've been working away quite hard in the background, looking at various different offers before they've got all the information from NESO. And there'll be a lot of other changes that will come as part of the variation, i.e. cost updates, etc. Is that kind of widespread now? Are we expecting that across all DNOs?
Yeah, I believe so. So the DNOs have actually had quite a long kind of run up to this. So they have been kind of working away in the background to, update their costs to see if a POC change is possible. for any projects. It's a wonderful opportunity for distribution projects to maybe, get a different POC if one is available. Yeah, there's I think there's going to be quite a lot of news hopefully coming out from the DNOs within the next, I'd say optimistically, kind of 3 or 4 weeks or so. But a lot of customers have been informed of like price changes already or any POC changes. So yeah, the DNOs have actually done really well in this, and that they have done as much work, like pre-work, as they could do beforehand before getting the offers.
I think it's worth noting that since we last spoke and had a podcast, DNOs have been a bit more forthcoming with writing down the fact that if you've got a technical limits offer that already, a solution that had already been put in place and presented, you can still move forward with that as long as you and the connections team can ultimately deliver to that date. Of course, at risk, but you don't necessarily need to wait until you've got your offer, which was always where we expected things would be, but it hadn't been written down or kind of presented recently until last month, which I think was a positive, but maybe not so positive on LIFO stacks and new technical limits.
No, it's very challenging for DNO customers to kind of justify moving forward with a project into the much more expensive stages of like procurement and like detailed design, because they just don't know what their curtailment's going to be. Their reinforcement solution might change. There's a huge amount that could actually change between the offer that they had and the offer that they're going to get, depending on where they were in the queue and their progress and kind of everything that's kind of shaking down from that queue reordering. So while it's kind of positive that they can continue if they want to, it's a very, very challenging investment decision for developers to make.
Yeah, and we've seen quite a lot of varied information as well across different DNOs on what's published and what hasn't yet. So I think if you do have a project in a particular DNO area and you haven't had access to a certain type of information, then don't assume that that's the level of information available across all DNOs. There's quite a variation, and more obviously still to come. But agree on that point around LIFO stack is quite specific. We won't get into the details now because we have talked about it before, but there will be some winners and losers, particularly projects that are in phase 2, either because they've been moved into phase 2 or had been phase 2 before, irrespective of whether they've got technical limits in phase 1. So quite a few challenges, I think, still to work through as projects get offers.
And a long wait as well.
Yes. Because assuming everything still falls into place as planned, we'll still be sitting here this time next year. Hopefully just closing off the final remarks on Gate 2 offers, but, but we will see. In terms of offers that have been issued, because we've also talked about 80% of those protected 2026, 2027 offers out. What's the feedback been so far? I've got a little bit of feedback from some developers on quality and errors, but yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts as well. So Rachel, if you've seen or heard about many.
Not many on the Gate 2 front, but I do know we've had some Gate 1 offers that have maybe had some uncertainty around them. So there is a clause in those Gate 1 offers that says why that project is getting a Gate 1 offer. And the default line around this is that it's essentially because the project requested to get a Gate 1 offer, which in some cases will be true, but in some cases isn't. So definitely worth checking that before you sign it to check that reasoning is correct.
Yeah, really good point. Because it's the challenge with Gate 1 offers, because they've got a perceived limited value. But of course, that could change. Things do change very quickly, and obviously people want to make sure that they're in the best contractual position possible. Interestingly, I suppose on Gate 2 offers, so it is interesting because what we've seen is quite varied. But generally speaking, a lot of offers that have had errors of some description. These sorts of things will happen. We get that. Maybe more the concern is these should be the relatively straightforward offers, and if offers are coming out without certain appendices, i.e. an appendix that tells you what the date of connection is intended to be, what your completion date is, then that's also a bit of an oversight. So appreciate there's a lot of pressure on the TOs and then also NISO to get those offers out. I think maybe something that one of the TOs suggested last week might actually help that and help the review process talking about having like a pre-offer call. So a kind of offer information call, as it was described. So that was SSEN Transmission. I know that others have voiced similar sort of considerations, but the idea of that is you would hear basically everything that they send out to NESO. Some things redacted, but the main things being cost, connection point, connection date. I think that'll be really, really helpful, particularly as we move through the summer, because you should be able to get information before you've got your offer, and then when you have your offer, you can quite quickly work out, is it an error on the NESO side? Is it something already that's a challenge to the TO? And that might help query management. But if you do have a query, where do you go at the moment? Is that still through the portal, Rachel?
I think still through the portal. And I believe there's been talk of creating some kind of, I guess, error register within the portal for these offers, which would hopefully help streamline things and make that a clearer process than perhaps the query process for original Gate 2 applications. But I think we're still waiting for a bit more information on that.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea to have the ability to raise the query there, have it then logged in a kind of like a dashboard, because also it'll make it much easier when it comes to that point, which is probably fairly inevitable that there'll be some projects where all queries can't be resolved within the time of the offer, so the offer validity period. So at least if that's like a formal log, both projects and NESO should in theory be in a much better position to sign the agreements with some outstanding queries or outstanding defects, so to speak. But yeah, probably a few weeks away from seeing the results of that, I expect. Just thinking, Nikki, we did see, it feels as if we've been talking about DNO methodologies for ages, because we have been kind of involved in the background with some of those discussions. But yeah, but it's now out there, isn't it? We now do have some guidance on how the DNOs have actually interpreted what NESO wrote down in the CNDM.
Yes, which I think is quite helpful, and it does clarify where sort of demand technologies and those projects that are like under 5 megawatts are going to fit in. So at least that's a process that the DNOs have now hopefully agreed on. I know there was quite a lot of discussion in the background and some different ideas being kind of proposed as to how that was going to work. But yeah, it's good to have that clarity on how the DNOs are able to put their queues together.
Thank you for listening so far. If insights like these are valuable in your work, then feel free to subscribe and stay current as Britain's connections landscape continues to evolve. Now, back to the connectologists.
I think, given where we've kind of got to, and Rachel, you mentioned as we kind of lead into the designation process and how that links into demand, we could probably just get straight into that conversation on the methodology consultation. Because if that already wasn't enough to respond to and think about, we've now got a consultation on the methodologies. I can't believe it's been a year already.
Neither can I. So yeah,
and
we
you
do.
wrote part of it.
Yeah, a distant memory now. So we now thankfully have an extra week to respond to that once the deadline was pushed back. So that's due on the 21st. And there is a lot to unpack in that. We've got some kind of very specific targeted changes. I mean, even right down to kind of correcting typos and things is all in there. But there is the overarching methodology document, which covers some kind of broader points that aren't reflected specifically in text changes, but sort of sets out NESO's latest position and whether or not that's changed since the original methodologies were published. So some of the mentions we've got there are things like attrition, the treatment of co-located projects, and repowering. So all of those have kind of been brought out to say, we actually don't think our position has changed since the initial methodologies, but we are interested to hear views and take those into consideration. And there could be consequential changes from that, but there's nothing actually proposed in the methodologies at the moment.
It's a really good point, and we'll hopefully be able to share it as part of the podcast itself. So we just created a quick spreadsheet version of the NESO tables, but it is noting that those are the changes, kind of classified in various different kind of classification orders down to really, really minor textual changes. But reading that alone, you could easily miss probably what's going to keep most people kind of interested in responding to the consultation. And I was going to say keep most people up at night, but there are those three areas which probably need most focus, and certainly are things I know we've talked about internally. So maybe I was just thinking maybe kind of bringing out the clause 3A and 3B concept and what's been proposed there.
Yes. So yeah, we've got so again, another area that they're seeking views on is battery oversupply. So we know due to the protections, there are significantly more batteries than the CP30 action plan deemed as needed. And we have more to come because we have the protections process, the protections clauses that cover kind of later applications coming in the next window for projects that had already got past that certain point of either submitting planning or having obtained planning by a certain date. And NISO are concerned about the levels of battery oversupply that we have in there. So one option that's been put forward, but not kind of marked out in methodology, so isn't set, is that clause 3A and 3B might be disapplied for batteries. So you would still have clause 2B, which is the support contract, so anything that's got a CFD or a CM since the first Gate 2 window, they would still be covered by protections as they've kind of been deemed needed. But this would look to disapply protections for those that have kind of been, didn't get a Gate 2 offer first time round, but have been working away in the background to progress their planning and now have obtained that planning, and they then wouldn't be able to come back in the next window.
Quite a topical one, because on one hand you can see the argument of oversubscription and oversupply, and then in the other, well, hold on, I've got a project, I've actively progressed based on the methodologies that were secured through license change, and now we're potentially changing the rule book. So I think it's very challenging, particularly when you've got quite a lot of moving parts. Maybe that's the other thing to draw out, that it's not just one change here we're talking about. There's lots of other potential changes like CMP 470 that's just been raised to bring in a potential kind of additional financial instrument kind of specifically for energy storage, separate of course to the PCF, which we've already seen kind of come through already and is kind of sitting in wait. We should know more about whether that's likely to be triggered or not in the coming months. But you then look back and say, well, hold on, we've also got queue management milestones as well. They will definitely come into play as we move forward and Gate 2 offers come into force. So it's quite tricky. Are you trying to resolve something in the real short term, which is my kind of reading of the methodology kind of question, do we need to do something more quickly, or do you let a lot of these other factors play out and see what the result is, noting we could end up with even more energy storage in the queue before either that naturally reduces or another mechanism's brought in. Tricky one. I'm sure we're not all going to agree.
Especially given that there are market forces, and this is going to play a huge part in this. Whether battery storage projects will actually be profitable. Developers do look at their projects and think, what is the current state of this project now? What's the connection date? What are the costs? What are the securities? Is this going to work or not? It'll be interesting sitting here in a year's time and saying how many Gate 2 offers were actually accepted or not. Because just because a project's got a Gate 2 offer, it doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't mean it's going to be viable. Especially for batteries. I think it's a kind of personal opinion, but I think it's very preemptive to be looking at this as a massive issue, because it's saying it can cause overbuild. It's not going to cause overbuild in the immediate future, and also NISO are meant to be kind of looking at batteries as a kind of a net negative impact on the grid anyway. There shouldn't really be a reason for there to be that much overbuild. If you're building a new GSP, that takes years to even find land, to take it through the planning system, and eventually to get it built. Thinking about doing that now instead of, if there's still a problem in 5 years' time, when you're looking to build a load more GSPs, potentially just for battery storage, then have a look at that. But I really don't think looking at it now is necessary.
I think there is other levers that potentially could be pulled without necessarily removing projects from the queue as well. So if if overbuild is a concern, there is the bay sharing policy, which it'd be good to hear more from the TOs about how they might be implementing that. But there is also potentially an option kind of not to allocate bays to some of those oversubscribed projects. So we know that oversubscription sits in phase 2, and as you say, these projects will need more time to build GSPs, to bring them on. So there is kind of a buffer there, I guess, in terms of maybe that could delay allocating bays to some of those projects, and allow that natural attrition, market attrition to occur, and then see who comes forward for the bays that remain.
I think co-location is going to play a part in this as well. It's not been really covered because it's seen as a too difficult to do, kind of in the too difficult to do box through CMP 434 and 435. But co-location makes a lot of sense if you're already, particularly those projects that will be absolutely going forward and building a solar farm or onshore wind, for example, and we're already going to have a BESS element alongside. I think there will definitely be a revisit of whether the kind of resulting outcome of having now 2 potentially separate projects taking 2 separate bays and costing a significantly higher amount of money to ultimately connect to the network. It's questionable whether that will be justifiable. Again, probably, Nikki, on your point, it should come back to the market. The market should help decide that. But at the moment, there's probably quite a few different varying signals that make it quite difficult for the market to kind of produce clear winners. Right. So I suppose on consultation, there were a couple of other points that we had drawn out. So that was clause 3A and 3B. And the last 2 were capacity reallocation and repowering. Maybe on capacity reallocation then. So there's quite a lot of talk in the consultation, the methodology consultation document around capacity allocation and capacity reallocation. So what's the change, Rachel? What are they proposing?
So I think it is more of a clarification potentially than a change. So it's really trying to distinguish between capacity allocation and capacity reallocation. So allocation is, I'm a brand new project applying to Gate 2 and I want to be added to the queue. So I am allocated capacity by default at the back of the queue, but there are potentially circumstances where someone might be brought forward. And then we've got capacity reallocation, which is a project has terminated and left the queue, and that capacity is now available for a project to kind of hop into that space that's been left in the queue. And the important clarification there is that space will go to a project that's already in the queue. So it's looking to reallocate existing capacity rather than kind of opening that out to the market and inviting someone else to apply. So the 2 processes do kind of follow similar steps, and there's like hierarchies as to who should get the capacity in each case, but there are some slight differences between them. But again, that's probably a whole other podcast worth of discussion.
Yeah, and I think that for people wanting to respond to the consultation, we would definitely feel that allocation, reallocation is an area to look at, particularly because it's something that's kind of been brought up by a number of our clients as well. And I suppose that pro and con with the approach that's been proposed, and that kind of clarification of that approach. But also, I'm just thinking, Nikki, how that then translates to deconnect customers. Because if you're sitting behind a number of transmission constraints, then how could you directly benefit from other parties falling away in the queue and that capacity being reallocated? And I think there are certain aspects of the proposal that maybe leave it certain areas open and others quite closed. So yeah, without going into too much additional information, it's probably an area of further focus. So that leaves us with repowering, And I know, Nikki, before we started the podcast, we started talking at quite some length. We should probably recorded that because it was quite an interesting discussion. But what's the challenge with repowering? Surely repowering is just a case of, well, I've got the tech, I've already connected, just get on with it. Or is it not as clear cut as that?
No, it's not, unfortunately. Also, before I forget, Regen did a really good paper on repowering recently on repowering wind. If anyone wants to go and give that a read, kind of encouraging public policy to really look in this direction. So it's always been a little bit different for transmission and distribution. So transmission projects have had more kind of license to change technologies for their grid connections in the past. So that's been a bit easier. Whereas distribution technologies, distribution connections, that hasn't quite been as easy a process. So if you wanted to repower a site, which I did, a lot of it, especially onshore wind sites, will be looking to do in the future, or the quite near future. It's quite challenging in terms of where you're going to sit in the queue, and also how these projects are viable as well. So from a distribution angle, there's a lot of projects that were energized during the FITS and the ROCs era. And they are, they are like the first solar farms that were built. So they were done under G59. Policies have been updated significantly since those projects were actually installed, and also just the viability of projects that size has really changed as well. So having lots of like 5 and 10 megawatt solar parks initially was a very viable prospect because we had FITs, we had ROCs, whereas obviously recently we've been going towards much larger projects. So for any developers to want to kind of increase that capacity could be quite challenging, or to kind of change the technology that they're using on site. There's no clear kind of policy regarding, oh, you want to change all your inverters, so is that actually a completely new application? Because it's essentially changing the site completely. So what we need is a proper repowering policy, and some guidance for DNOs to follow as well. So it's not kind of done piecemeal. Yeah, not sure about the transmission angle. That's a little bit of a different one, but yeah, it's certainly very relevant, especially for lots of onshore wind in Scotland that will be looking to repower quite soon.
Yeah, and I think from a transmission perspective, it's probably a very similar kind of concept in that, well, if you've got, maybe a little bit easier to see that if you've got tech, the question is, well, do you maintain that tech if you're going to be repowering? Does it matter if your technology is changing? I suppose, what do we mean by technology change? Is it technology, or is it whether you fit into a particular strategic alignment category? So like low carbon technologies, would that cover a number of different technology types? So I think the devil there is in the detail. Also, if you have tech now and you're putting an increase in for some additional tech, is it the additional tech that goes to the back of the queue, which was always the approach, that would go to the back of the queue, but your existing tech would remain the same. So there's quite a lot of permutations there, and I think that's going to be really important because a lot of, and that's important at FID stage, because a lot of projects will take that into account on whether they're expecting 2 life cycles for that technology or not. Because as we know, a lot of these assets that you put in place, you're putting it in place for your 20 years plus. A lot of the assets would last for kind of 40 of a natural lifespan of 40 years, particularly if you're paying termination liabilities to NESO. You're going to be paying them because you're ultimately, or posting them because you're ultimately liable if you were to cancel the project at any point between energization and when the project comes to an end. So there's a recognition that these assets last a long time, so you don't want to be in a situation where you want to repower, but you're forced to ultimately give that up. There's also all the legal complications of bays and how those have been offered, whether you're in Scotland or England. And are you in a situation where you own the bay you have an interface agreement in place. So again, that makes it really quite complicated that, well, if you're now no longer to move forward and be the person repowering, be the user repowering, and a third party is given that capacity, well, you're still in a legal agreement for the interface aspects as well. And of course, there's all the other kind of ramifications as well from a land and planning perspective. It becomes extremely complicated. And I suppose my feeling is it's probably too much to cover in a couple of lines within the methodologies consultation. Appreciate the reason it's there, but it has, certainly from some of the conversations we've had, it's become quite a kind of hot topic. So maybe one that can be managed from a consultation or managed from a methodologies perspective and then picked up separately in a bit more detail.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely needs a lot more attention.
So we have come to an end of a lot of discussion. I've got a very, very small amount of topics that we actually had on the original list, just because there has been so much that's changed, even in the space of kind of 4 to 6 weeks. So I suppose that just brings me to say thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Nikki, and thank you very much for everyone else who's stuck with us and listened to the podcast. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining the Connectologists in this exploration. This knowledge sharing is made possible by the support of our clients. We thank them and hope it will help the whole of industry to connect society's critical infrastructure faster. If you found this useful, you're welcome to explore more free insights at roadnighttaylor.co.uk/connectology, or click on the Insights tab at the top of our homepage. Thank you.